My name is Gary Barnett. I'm an artist and abstract painter, and I'm from Waterloo, Ontario. And thank you for watching this interview. I evolved to the way I paint now. I actually started um, very early when I was very young. I started drawing, but it was just for myself. I wasn't taught, I was just self-taught. And drawing really interested me, pencil drawing. And then eventually, when I got older, I took graphic design in college. Um, with the graphic design training, part of the course was drawing and painting, illustrating, really. That got me more interested in painting. So I actually started taking some courses, part-time courses at the University of Waterloo. That's where I grew up. And I learned more about painting. And I used to draw landscapes. I used to paint when I first started. Like most artists, I looked at other people's work and other famous artists like Picasso and Van Gogh, and they really inspired me to paint landscapes in different styles. Like, was kind of learning from them, I guess. But eventually I got very interested in abstract art, and that's what led me into painting the way I paint now. At that time, when I started studying abstract art, I was really inspired by an artist from California called Paul Jenkins, and also some other abstract artists that really kind of inspired me to try different techniques. And at that time, of course, this is back in the early, I guess the mid 1970s, 1974, 75, was when I started experimenting with different pouring techniques. And at that time, I didn't know anybody who was doing pouring art, which now today has become a very established style of painting. So I was just very experimenting with large canvases on a floor in a big room, pouring paint on it. I started tilting the canvas, blowing the paint, finding other alternative ways to control the paint rather than using a brush, because I found painting with a brush very tedious, and I wasn't really getting the natural kind of results that I wanted to get. I started experimenting with pouring and mixing different things in with the paint. One thing that led me to that is that I've always inspired by nature and things that happen naturally in nature, like frost on a window, or the way a river delta is formed by water running over it for years and years, and it creates these really unique, interesting patterns that happen naturally from natural forces. So that's what really the foundation of what inspired me to start to paint, pouring water onto paint and manipulating it to see what kind of natural results I could get. I guess I worked on that style of painting for about 5, 6, 7 years. I was having some shows in art galleries, but it was difficult because there was no internet back then. And I had to go and physically take my work to galleries and show them what I was doing. And some galleries most galleries were not very responsive, because at that time, nobody was doing the kind of art that I was doing. So I did get kind of frustrated with it. I did have a show in Toronto, and a group show, and I was the only artist that sold, and my work was really responded well. But the gallery didn't survive. The gallery ended up closing. So again, it was kind of a frustrating. I think I painted up till about 1983, and I end up stopping painting. I ended up moving to a different city, and I was working in graphic design at that time. So I kind of got sidetracked and I took on a management position in a company. I stopped painting for 30 years, roughly. So I still had some of my older paintings, and people who saw them said, well, why did you stop painting? These are like great. We love them. And I always thought someday I would start back. And I eventually, I don't know, I guess jumping ahead 30 years, which was 6 or 7 years ago. I met my Lynn, who is my current wife, and she really inspired me to get painting again. And I guess I just needed that first step. And once I started painting, I basically picked up where I left off. I started mixing different chemicals with the paint, and I actually built a table. The studio I had at that time, I built an 8-foot by 4-foot glass table, very flat. And to paint the way I paint, I need a really flat surface. So I built that table, and I just started. I picked up exactly where I left off back in the 1980s, and started painting again. As a graphic designer, I did some. I guess I did some digital art on the computer, which was kind of manipulating images in Photoshop, which was kind of, I guess, a little bit creative, and I did enjoy doing that. But I wasn't really fine art. I wasn't doing anything in it. I'm also a musician. I've been playing the guitar since I was 13. So I got very involved in music, became my, I guess, creative outlet. So I did get quite involved in music for that time. I was writing songs and recording myself, playing with some other musicians occasionally, but I really just stopped art. And I always wanted to get back into art because I really enjoyed the process of painting and creating visual art. And so I guess I just, once I made that first step, I rented a studio and I bought some paints, and I just started painting, and then I was sorry that I ever stopped. I started, producing a lot of paintings. I've had many shows. I've had shows in Toronto. I had a show in Montreal. Of course, everything last year was canceled because all the galleries were closed. But yeah, I just left up. I understood. I think when I was creating this style of painting the way I paint now, back in the 70s and 80s, I didn't really understand I had no concept behind what I was doing. And I realized when I started painting again that that's what what I was lacking, because I think any abstract art style, I think you have to have a concept behind what you're doing, or you'll lose your purpose in it. You'll lose your direction. And when I got back to painting, I really started to, I think, understand why I was painting the way I was painting. I realized that my paintings were inspired by nature, and nature to me is all chemistry. It's chemistry in the universe that's constantly evolving and changing and being manipulated by forces. And that's what was inspiring me to paint that way. And then once I really realized that, I sort of developed the concept of my painting, then I felt like I had more control over what I was doing. Because I think painting is really all about control. It's the artist's job, or the artist's, ability to control the paint. You can control the paint with a brush or a palette knife or an airbrush, or there's different, tools you can use. But for me, I choose to use natural energy to control the paint. I mix chemicals with the paint. I blow the paint and move it around. I drag it with paper. I drag 2 layers of paint over top of each other, and then they interact with each other and form patterns. So it's all a very chemical, natural reaction that happens. And once I really understood the concept behind the techniques that I was using, I think it gave me better control to be able to hopefully master what I was doing. And that's what sort of led me to the point I am now. Well, I guess my guiding philosophy is I always go back to that, using natural forces to control the paint. Last year I started my style of painting has always been very abstract, in that there are no shapes, or I would say there's no representation or illustration of other elements in my painting. Like, I think it was Jackson Pollock, some famous abstract artist, that said a painting is just can be just a painting. A table is a table, and an abstract painting is just a painting. It doesn't have to be something. So I kind of wanted to take that concept farther, that rather than just an abstract painting, there's a concept behind my painting. And that's, as I mentioned before, about the concept of nature, energy, and force. And all of my paintings really represent nature as a whole, not as any one thing. So like, I would say that my paintings, when I paint, it's more of a natural event that happens on the canvas rather than trying to create a picture. I'm creating a natural event. Now, there is an element of design in my paintings. It's not completely random. I don't, for some people, I think when they look at my work, they just, it moves them, and hopefully that's great. That's my goal, is to, when people look at my work, to feel something emotional, to get something back from it. But there is an element of design, and the design again goes back to nature. All of nature, it has a design to it, I believe. Every living thing has a central core, or us, we have a heart, we have a brain, and these are kind of like our centers, and our energy flows from those elements. And a flower has a central core. Every life form, right down to a cell, has a core where energy comes from, and it emanates from that center throughout the entire being. And this is the design element that instinctively, as I'm working towards finding that core, that center, and building the painting out from that. So the energy kind of flows from the areas in the painting and moves out. And hopefully the goal is that when you look at it, you feel that energy, you see that energy, and you get that energy back. Because I think we're all part of this massive energy in the universe that's life. And that's the element that's the part of the painting where design comes into play. Because anybody can pour paint. And there are a lot of artists who pour paint, or doing styles of pouring paint and then manipulating the paint. But being able to control it and being able to design it into a way that you really feel something when you look at it, that I think takes time. And that's, what I think was over years have evolved, is the ability to design the end result. And that takes control. And that's, again, going back to the painting is about control. So even when you pour paint and you're letting nature manipulate the paint, you have to be able to control it. I always say it's kind of like a dance. I'm working with the paint. We work together. It's back and forth. I control it, but it moves and goes the way it wants sometimes. And I have to kind of pull it back, or manipulate it and control it into the way I want it to go. Yeah. Yeah, I started working in series. I'm not sure why that happened, but it's exactly right. Like certain things in nature would inspire me. I did a series called Terraform, and that was inspired by like rocks, different types of rocks, and earth, and so I called the series Terraform. And a lot of the colors in that series are browns and oranges, and the colors of, so if there's anything really that's kind of a real that I'm drawing from in nature, it would be the colors and textures. That series was very textural. Most of my series are just acrylic paint, But in that series, I used some acrylic mediums that have sand and different particles in it, and I mix things with the mediums, and I spread them on, and then I would pour water, run water or drip water onto them for several hours, and that water would create natural patterns in the materials. And then I would mix different types of paint and chemicals in with it and add layers on top. So that whole series wasn't that's how I sort of that's what I was inspired to create in that series. Then I did later I did another series called Pearl, and that all of that series, the paintings had iridescent paints mixed in with the acrylic paint, mother of pearl, several different types of iridescent paints. So I've sort of with each series each series has really been an experiment with different types of paint or different colors, which just kind of led me into once I started a series, I would, I sort of had a goal in mind, and it was often just a matter of choosing colors that represented that part of nature. So I would usually do about a dozen paintings in that series, and then I would move on to something else. Right now, I've taken a break a couple months. I haven't been painting. I took another little break because during COVID, which was last year, I was painting a lot, like every day. And I got into, like I mentioned earlier, that my paintings were totally abstract. So back at the beginning of 2020, I started working in creating flowers using the same abstract type of pouring and chemicals that I've always used, but I started incorporating real elements into my paintings, but very abstract. I've worked on those quite a bit. I kind of took a break. I stopped for a couple months now, just because sometimes I feel like I need a little bit of a break, and then I'll start again and I'll work a lot. So, I kind of, I guess I'm not like some artists have a very structured schedule where they'll work every day for so many hours a day. And when I paint, I'll paint a lot and I'll paint every day, but then sometimes I need a break for a few weeks. This is the longest break I've took in a while. A couple months is a long break for me. So I'm really ready to start back. I'm kind of getting excited now about starting back to do more paintings. And as I mentioned with last year, I started working with flowers. So I was incorporating flowers into my technique, but I was creating the flowers, again, not using a brush, not using any kind of normal painting tools that artists use. I was creating the flowers by blowing it, adding a lot of paint in one area and then blowing it out to create the petals of the flowers. Also, I was creating flowers and petals and different parts of the flower by dragging materials across the painting. I generally start with a pouring of paint all over the entire canvas. Then I start adding things into the painting so that the painting is wet all the time and it's moving and changing. It took quite a while of experimenting to actually create flowers in that way. But I started using different materials, paper, using small pieces of paper to drag the paint out to create petals, chains, blowing. And I also use small bottles with a very fine tip. So I squirt paint onto the canvas to create different parts of the flower as well. Actually, they're both challenging in different ways. When I started painting, when I had stopped for 30 years and got back to painting, I painted very large because I found I was more comfortable, I guess, painting large. When I started working small, I realized it was a real challenge. Because when you're working small, I think it's a more intimate experience with the paint. I'm using the same techniques, but you really want to get all of that energy that I'm, again, going back to creating an energy that emanates from, within the center of the painting and moves out, and creates an emotional feeling when you look at it. To do that small is more challenging, but I think I managed to do it. I did some work small for a while, and was really happy with what I was getting. Then I went back to working more of a medium size, which again, I find that very comfortable. Working 24 by 30 inch size paintings is very comfortable. Going back to working large, I do enjoy all the sizes of painting. Each one is a unique challenge in its own to create the kind of end result that I want to get. It's a little bit different to do it on the different sizes, for sure. I have like the series I mentioned before, Terraform. There's a lot of different styles of mixed media. And like a lot of artists using collage techniques and different types of materials. I've never really done that type of mixed media, but with my Terraform series, I mixed a lot of different types of acrylic mediums and acrylic paint together. And so in a sense, it was a mixed media for me, for my style. Yeah, I have experimented. I have been doing a few paintings lately where I have done a little bit of brushwork, which I did last year. At the end of last year, I started incorporating real elements into my paintings. I did about half a dozen paintings where I incorporated a bird into the painting, an elephant into one painting. And it was a challenge because I think I was trying to see if I could take my style of abstract painting in another direction, another dimension almost. But it was something I wanted to experiment with, and I was happy with the results. But now that I've taken my break and I'm going to go back to painting, I just want to go back to kind of my early stages where pure abstract expressionism. So that's kind of what I'm going to start to work on now. Yes, thank you. Like I mentioned before, I got involved in music very young. I've been playing the guitar since I was 13, and I play a little bit of piano. And I've had many synthesizers. I've played with synthesizers a lot over the years, mostly years ago. But when I got back into painting, I had been writing that type of music, very abstract, synthesizer-based music. And I've been doing that for years as a hobby. And then I realized when I started painting again 7 years ago, that painting to me is very much like that music. They're both very organic, and I think you used the word astral. There's a lot of similarities between them. So that's the kind of music that I listen to when I'm painting, actually. Because I feel it really inspires me to paint the way I paint. I think when I'm painting, I'm not really conscious of I'm not trying to design or create anything specific. It's like I'm working with the paint, in harmony with the paint, and the painting just evolves. And when I listen to abstract music like that, it just kind of takes me into almost another zone where I'm unconsciously working with the paint, and the painting just evolves. So that music has really inspired me to paint. And I guess that's why I put it on my website as well. I have some samples of work that I've done, because the two really, for me, go together hand in hand. Yes, I've had a lot of people at my shows. People have come up and talked to me about my work, and a lot of people have said that, and I can see that too, because I've always been inspired by astrology and the galaxies, and looking at photographs of that. A lot of people have said either it looks like something you see under a microscope, or it looks like something you see in outer space. And I think the reason that is, and it's not like I consciously plan that, but because of the way I paint, going back to what I said in the beginning, that I think everything in the universe is just chemistry and energy. And since this is the way I'm painting, just using paint and mixing chemicals with the paint, and then using energy to control the paint, it by default, it looks like everything in the universe. It can look like a microorganism at some areas, or it can look like a galaxy in other areas. I actually went at one of my shows, two shows that I had in Toronto, one in Toronto and one in Kingston here. I provided magnifying glasses at the show, and they were hanging around the gallery in different areas, because there's so much detail, that, and it looks like cells or something you'd see under a microscope. And I noticed that in my studio. Sometimes I had a magnifying glass and I would look at the different areas, and I was amazed at some of the detail, the natural patterns and formations that are created within the paint. So I started putting magnifying glasses at my shows, and the two shows I had were called A Closer Look, and which, describes the experience, when many people would pick up the magnifying glasses and look at my paintings in certain areas through the magnifying glass and see the detail in it. So, but yeah, I think because my work is so connected to nature, it can look like anything from a cell to the universe. Because all the paint I use is acrylic and it's water-based, so there's really no fumes. I do use a paint thinner called Floetrol, which is, again, it's a water-based chemical, so it's not toxic. None of the paints or chemicals I use are toxic. I started using, there's two different chemicals I use to thin my paint. I don't use water anymore to thin my paint. I only use paint thinners, acrylic paint thinners, because it gives me better results. Water tends to break down the polymers in the paint, the base that holds the paint together, and it just can turn into a big muddy mess. So I started using, several years ago, I started using paint thinners, and but they're all water-based paint thinners, so there's no fumes, but it really does make a difference getting the results I want. I can get those results with those as opposed to mixing with water. I do pour water over certain areas of the paint, or I spray water on certain areas once I've added the paint onto the canvas, but I use very minimal amount of water right now. I think it helped me. It made it made me more structured, and having a goal orientated teaches you to have goals that you have to achieve on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, a yearly basis. I think it did teach me a lot that way. It really taught me communication too, because I think most artists generally, we tend to work in our own little bubble. When I worked in management for years, I had employees, and several employees that reported to me, and I reported to people above me. So it taught me how to communicate with people, which is good, I think. I think, as an artist, you can be too isolated, and I think that's, and something that happened. A lot of artists, there's a lot of really talented artists around, but some of them work very isolated, and they're very maybe shy, and not very aggressive when it comes to getting out there and getting their work out there for people to see it. So that probably did help me in that way, that I'm not afraid to talk about my work or present it or show it anywhere. Well, I belong to an art association now, which is in a town near me, and they have a gallery. So I'm in there every month. I've had some shows in other galleries around. When I lived in Waterloo, I grew up in Waterloo and lived most of my life there. I belonged to a co-op gallery there as well. So we had shows around the Kitchener-Waterloo area. and it was a group. They were group shows. Everybody, there was 16 artists that belonged in the group. So I did have a lot of shows with that group. And then I did have my own solo exhibitions as well. I have had outdoor art shows. With some of my smaller work, it's hard to take big work into a park, into a tent, but I have done some of that as well. Um, Galleries are a little bit challenging these days. There's not as many galleries around. Galleries struggle to survive. Especially with the last year. What's been going on. They've had to cancel. Been shut down for most of the time. So, and it's already was tough for galleries to survive. So, I like to show in the gallery environment because I think people can really focus on your work. When people go to a show with a lot of different artists and artisans and potters and different people, they don't really focus on your work as much. I like the gallery way of showing my work because I think people come to see your work and they really can experience it when they see a lot of your work all in one room. They can see the different styles. Like although my work is it's all done the same way. Like you mentioned, I work in different series and they're all different colors and different techniques a little bit. So it's nice to show all the different sides of what I'm doing in a gallery. Yeah, that's interesting. I have done workshops, classes where I've other people have come and I've taught them my techniques. I did that early last year. I haven't been doing it. Well, of course, with COVID, I haven't been doing it now since last winter, since over a year ago. But I did have classes and people really enjoyed it. I think they found it therapeutic to be able to pour paint and paint the way I paint. I actually, I talked to somebody from Florida several years ago, and he's actually a therapist, and he uses music. He was kind of interested in my music because he uses music as a form of therapy for people for different problems that they're having. And we had a nice conversation because I explained to him that when I started painting this way many years ago, back in the 80s, I was experimenting by using vibration to create patterns in the paint. And my goal was to actually use sound underneath a canvas to vibrate the canvas and create patterns. And I did some experimenting with it, but I haven't pursued that. But I thought that was really interesting. He found it really interesting because he thought there'd be some therapeutic use for that kind of technique. And yeah, you know what, I guess I can't even predict it. I don't. I mean, maybe I'm not as I think some artists are maybe more driven to plan their future and make it happen. And I probably don't think about that as much, especially since COVID. Right now, I just think about painting, and I do want people to see my work. I have nowhere where my work's going to go. I've sold a few pieces to someone in England, and I've shipped my work there, and that's the farthest away that my work has gone. But I've sold, many of my paintings all around Ontario. My goal really would be to have my work being shown or in everywhere, but it's something. It's a challenge, I think, for all artists, because I think all artists want that. And the internet has been wonderful because it allows people to see my work I've had people see my work. Well, I don't know how you found my work, I guess through my website. But people have seen my work from all over different countries. And that's great. I mean, it's nice that it's being appreciated that way. it's interesting. Like I don't, of course, the way I paint, I could never do that. And there are artists who can paint, like the tools that digital painting has allowed. They've designed brushes, digital brushes, and digital spray nozzles. So, if you're an airbrush painter or a brush painter, a palette painter, they've actually come up with really refined the process. I started, seeing that happening back 20 years ago, when computers really started taking off more. 20, 30 years ago, they started working on that process. And I've seen artists who can actually create an entire painting and it looks like it was painted with a brush, and it was all done in a computer. And I mean, I think that's great. It doesn't really interest me because I don't paint with a brush. I suppose if there was some way that I could create my paintings on a computer, and I've thought about that. I've thought about somehow, I mean, I'm not a computer programmer, but if it was possible, I would find that really interesting. And I'd love to experiment with something like that. If somebody could write a program that could actually do what I do, but doing it on a computer instead of using real paint, I think that would be quite fascinating, but I'm not sure how that would be even possible. I paint on boards a lot. They're special art boards. They're very flat, and they're made with a special type of wood, and then you prime it with you gesso it. And I have painted on those. Like smaller work, I paint on boards, and then larger work I paint on canvases, just because the boards are too heavy. So that's the only two materials that I've worked on. I have painted on glass, where I pour the paint onto glass and then use a sheet of paper and lay it over the paint and lift it up. And it's kind of like a form of printing. The paint image is then transferred onto the paper. I've done some experimenting with that. There's some interesting things that different results you can get from doing that technique. Well, right now, I mean, the only place that people can see my art is on my website, at garybarnett.ca. That's the best place to go, because I've almost every painting I've done in the last 6-7 years is on my website. I've organized it into different periods, different years, and all the different series that I've done. So everything is on there, and there is a lot of information about my concept of painting, my philosophy. That's on there as well, and that's really the best place to go and find out more about my art.